Hey everyone, wanted to make one more quick video for you this week. For this video, I want to talk about the two sample essays that I had given you to read. I know I made it into a discussion and you submitted your stuff there, and I figured it would probably be better for me to make a video talking about it than to respond to your discussions. So this way, I don't know, maybe there's something better about that. So yeah, I want to go through both of these and just kind of highlight what I thought some of the takeaways were from looking at these two samples, and just a couple of reminders as you continue to work on your essays. Okay, so this first one that's titled "Independence in America." I want to start reading a little bit of it. I'm going to start in the first paragraph, like 3 sentences in, and I think. Trying to look for like the thesis here, right? So we're looking at the first paragraph. There should be a thesis in here. So I want to look at kind of the last 3 sentences of the first paragraph. And try to see what the thesis is. So this person writes, in the reading Independence Day by Cepiata, the entire Dorrego family has their own issues with independence. Both Eve and Mrs. Dorrego are bonded to someone else to keep their legal status afloat. However, neither of these women actually want to be in the position they are currently in. They want to branch out and start their own lives without being tied to these people for the sole purpose of citizenship. So everything they say here is correct, right? It's true that their immigration statuses are kind of barrier towards gaining independence, like we've talked about. But I don't think this is a thesis. Like this last sentence here, they want to branch out and start their lives without being tied to these people. Like that's just a fact, So like the important thing that I think we can get from this essay, and I think this is kind of true for the whole thing. I know it's like 3 pages. We probably didn't need to read that much of it to kind of get what I was going for here, is that this first one, the first sample essay, is almost entirely summary. There really is not an argument here. To say that, even Mrs. Dorrego want to branch out and start their own lives, but, their immigration status is a problem for them in doing that, that's just kind of a factual reading of what happens in the story, right? That's kind of telling us what happened. That's not making any sort of argument, and it's not debatable, right? We've talked about the idea that the thesis has to be debatable. You have to imagine that like somebody could argue against you and say, well, that's not the message I think it sends. So really the thing here is that they don't take the step from going like, from the things that happen in the story to what message it sends. This essay is exclusively focused on what happens in the story and does not make it into considering what message this sends to the reader or what this means about the world we live in or what we should take away from the story, right? It's just kind of like, hey, this happens in the story. It's like, yes, it sure does. But so what? But what's the point? Why should I care? All of those questions, I think, remain unanswered throughout this. Just to give some more examples of how this works, looking at the bottom of the first page here. So they're talking about Mrs. Dorrego and kind of like her experiences and how her husband expects her to do all the housework and stuff. They say here at the bottom of the first page, Mrs. Dorrego is bonded to someone who is not very nice and does not treat her very well, all because she cannot be independent without him. And that's the end of their third paragraph. So again, I think we've talked about this before too, the idea that at the end of a paragraph, you kind of want to connect back to your thesis, right? So if I'm looking at the last sentence of this paragraph, Mrs. Dorrego is bonded to someone who's not very nice to her, all because she can't be independent without him. Again, that's just something that happens in the story. That's not saying, like, here's what this shows us about the immigration system. It's not like there's a way you could make this into an argument by saying, like, the story shows us that, the immigration system is flawed and it creates these kinds of problems for people. And that would be looking at a takeaway that would teach us something about the real world. But all this essay is saying is like, yeah, here's what happens. So I don't think this essay, again, makes it into the realm of like analysis and argument. It is almost entirely summary. Another thing that stuck out to me about this one is that, even though they're summarizing so much of the story, basically the whole thing is summary, they also manage to not use any quotes. They're all just kind of retelling what happens. So it's always going to be more convincing if we can get at least, a few quotes throughout so that the reader can see exactly how these things happen in the story itself. Help us to be a little bit more convincing. So I think one of the questions I asked you was which one of these drafts was better. And to me, this first one, the Independence in America, this is the worst draft. I think this one is worse, and I would give it a worse grade. And these are both rough drafts, by the way. I think that should be obvious, right? But this one seems not as good to me as the other one, and I'll talk about the other one in a second. But I've seen students, I've when I've done this in class, I've had students tell me that they thought this one was better. And I think the reason that some students see it that way is because you could say in a way that like the grammar and kind of the sentence structure of this essay might be better than the other one, right? This one might be a little more clear and easy to understand. So that leads some people to say, well, this is the better essay. But just like I've been trying to say all semester about having our priorities in terms of writing, like the grammar and the sentence structure might be better here, but the argument and the organization and the thesis and the evidence and the quotes, all of that stuff is worse. So to me, even though it might sound better or it might flow better in things, this one to me is not making an argument, so it can't be the better essay. All right, and with that, let's turn to this other one. Okay, so I want to read just kind of starting from maybe like the second or third sentence. Or no, I'll start from the very top of this one. This is the sample essay number 2. It says, in many texts, articles, magazines, passages, and books, women are seen as the mere object of the text. In everyday life, women are seen as a figure, not a human. On the other hand, when men are seen in words, they are seen as heroes, victors, and the light to the darkness. It is rare when a woman is seen as the center hero, and if they are, they have an evil, dark mood to their heroism. Whereas in the context of Independence Day, written by Cefiata, it shows the difference of women in their cultures and home situations. So, it's a little strange the way that this one starts, but I think something that it does that kind of works is that it starts with like a more general thing, just about like gender and the depictions of women in literature, and then it gets into the specifics of, okay, and then in Independence Day by Cefiata, here's what happened. And yeah, like they could say what they're trying to say maybe a little bit more clearly, and maybe they did, in their final draft. Okay, let me read the last sentence here. So this is what I take to be the thesis for this essay. It says, throughout the text, it mentions 4 significant females who have very diverse problems, but would end with similar struggles. Mrs. Dorego, Eve, Madam Queen, and Teacher's Daughter are all characters from the text that represent a variation of females facing the battles women face every day. So this, I think, is an argument. This, I think, is a thesis. And a super important word here is the word represent. It says these 4 characters from the text represent a variation of females facing the battles women face every day. So because they're looking at what those characters represent, you're kind of now making an argument about the message, right? About what it shows us, what we should take away from the story. And they end up saying that, each of these women, each of the characters in the story kind of stand in for a different like set of problems that real life women face depending on their situations, right? Some women are married and they have to deal with those problems. Some, are younger and trying to get a job, like Eve, and they have to deal with those problems. Some have problems with their parents, like the teacher's daughter, and all this stuff. So like by looking at what the depictions in the story represent, it moves into the realm of analysis and argument, and I think that makes it a pretty decent thesis. So that's, I think, the most important thing about this essay, that I see it as making an argument about a message the story sends, which, again, is the fundamental thing that a literary analysis essay needs to do and that we need to make sure we're doing. Okay, a couple other things that I thought were good here. I think I did some decent job with the research that they had. So I'm looking here in like the second paragraph of the essay, where they're talking about Mrs. Dorego and her relationship with her husband and how he doesn't really help out. And they have a quote here. It says, research has shown that the marriage benefits, the increase in wealth, health, and happiness that are associated with the status, go disproportionately to men. Married men are better off than single men. Married women, on the other hand, are not better off than unmarried women. So I think this is a good piece of research, because something I've tried to get across is that like when we're doing research for this, I know that it's probably hard and we're struggling with doing the research, but one way you can approach this is by finding some like research about your topic itself and then trying to apply that to the text. So that's what they did here. Since what happens in the text is a married woman whose husband won't help out is kind of making her life difficult. So they found some research that's just like about gender and marriage and how it works in real life, and then they applied that to the story. So I think that was good. And then I also wanted to read the sentence right after that quote. It says, as shown in the study, Women are more likely not to be happy in marriages, as Mrs. Dorego is not because of her arrogant husband who does not speak to her respectfully. So I think that was a good job of explaining the quote, right? Whenever you quote, especially from a source, but also from the story, you want to have a sentence right after, maybe a couple of sentences, depending. But you want to make sure that after you give the quote, you then explain to the quote. You explain the quote and tell us why it's important and what we're supposed to be getting from the quote. Don't assume that the audience is going to know why you included that quote. You kind of got to tell them. I think they did a good job doing that. Although they possibly could have done more to introduce the quote. I think this quote, and there's another quote from an outside source they have, and they both do kind of feel like they're just like dropped in, like parachuting in from the sky. So we could do more to maybe set it up beforehand and give the reader some context so it like flows better in the paragraph. Yeah, so I think those are the only real things that I want to highlight with this one. So again, even though the second essay, it might, sound a little more choppy or there might be some grammar issues or whatever, it makes an argument about the text. And that is the key here. That's the number one thing you should be focusing on to get a good grade on this essay, is that you're arguing about the message the text is sending about one of those topics. What is it trying to show us about gender? What is it trying to show us about globalization? All this kind of stuff. And the second essay, I think, does that. The first essay, I think, does not. So hopefully by looking at these two together, we can make sure that our essays are, again, grounded in the text and making an argument about it. All right, I hope this helped out a little bit. See you soon.